Philman, the president for the League of Women Voters, and I'd like to thank you for joining us in the middle of such a beautiful day outside. Before we welcome our speaker series chair and our host, just a couple of quick guidelines. If you would, please stay muted during the presentation so that everyone can hear our presenter. And also either use the chat if you have a question for our presenter, or you can use the raise the hand feature, and we will probably actually take questions more towards the end of the presentation. So having said that, I am going to turn this over to our speaker series chair. Let me stop sharing my screen.
Hi, everyone.
So this is actually, I'm sorry, this is actually Laura Strickland. Laura actually joined our board here in mid-July. So Laura's actually a 22-year, I'm sorry, she's a native of Jacksonville. She's spent 22 years in the local public schools as an educator. She has a master's in library and information science. She was an English language arts teacher for the 7th and 8th grade. And she's also worked as a school librarian and a media specialist. So we're very thankful to have her on our board. And having said that, I will turn it over to Laura.
Well, thanks for the intro, Linnell. I didn't know I was going to be introduced. I, as the school librarian and working in high schools, had the opportunity to be the sponsor of many clubs and many different organizations that would be involved in our community. And they had a great tie-in with Sarah. The Out of the Darkness Walk, which you may have seen a link for in the newsletter and on the website. That was something that we used to participate in quite a bit. Sarah is joining us. She's been with the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention for better than 9 years. And she has worked with, oops, her thing just faded away. She's worked with different groups. She's ASIST and what was the other one? Sarah, you're going to have to help me.
I've been trained in ASIST and safeTalk.
Okay.
Yeah, education.
Yes. So in education and prevention in suicide, which many people have often said, well, how do you prevent it? This is where it is. It's all lands in the mental health and wellness type of field, and Sarah is going to help us with that. So please welcome Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So today we're going to go over basically the scope of the problem, the research, and prevention, and what you can do. I'm going to go ahead and, sorry, I'm getting situated over here. Okay. And before I begin, I just want to let you know that I do have a puppy, and she's satisfied right now. But if you hear noises in the background, that is her. And again, I will answer any questions at the end that you might have, so you can feel free to put them in the chat box. So before we get started, I want to go over some basic terminology that we use when we talk about suicide. It's really important to model appropriate language so that we do not perpetuate the stigma that is surrounding suicide or mental health conditions. We avoid using the phrase committed suicide as it can have a negative connotation. And instead we encourage the phrases died by suicide, ended their life, or killed themselves. When talking about suicide and suicide, we avoid referring to suicide attempts as failed or successful. Not only is it unnecessary, but these words do imply judgment. And instead, we encourage the use of phrases such as suicide attempt, suicide, death by suicide. Educating the public about suicide is critical for encouraging help seeking, raising awareness of risk in vulnerable populations, and advocating for new interventions and prevention strategies for those that are at risk. When suicide is talked about safely and accurately, we can help reduce the likelihood of its occurrence. And we really want to change how society understands mental health and suicide, because when we open up and we connect with people, talk really does save lives. So suicide is a significant issue that affects individuals, families, and communities worldwide. Suicide is a global problem, and according to the World Health Organization, each year over 800,000 people die by suicide. While this is the most accurate data available, we estimate the numbers to be higher since suicide is underreported in many countries. And that really works out to a suicide every 40 seconds worldwide. In the United States, suicide rates are recorded by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And according to the CDC, 48,344 people died by suicide in 2018. This makes suicide the 10th leading cause of death. Suicide takes more lives in the US than homicide, war, and natural disasters combined. These high numbers are one of the many reasons that it's important to talk about suicide like any other cause of death. The more we talk, the less stigmatized the idea that we all face struggles and need support becomes. For every death by suicide, it's estimated that 25 others attempt. That's about 1 million Americans each year who survive a suicide attempt. When you think about any loss, it impacts people in the community, and suicide is no different. The loss affects family, friends, co-workers, neighbors, schools, faith-based communities, etc. It is estimated that the majority of Americans will experience a suicide loss over the course of their lifetime. In addition to the devastating toll that suicide has on families and communities, both emotionally and socially, there's a fiscal impact on our society as well. The CDC estimates that for the year 2016, suicide, including both suicide attempts and suicide deaths, cost the United States $69 billion, cost due primarily to lost wages and productivity. So let's move on to research. And only in the past several decades have scientists been studying suicide. Research is shedding light on many critical areas: what drives up risk and what that amounts to effective suicide prevention, and we still have more to learn. This section is just going to provide an overview of suicide prevention research, key research findings, and future goals in the field. One of the main questions research explores is, why do people take their own lives? Through research, we have learned that there is no single cause for suicide. Suicide most often occurs when several stressors and health issues converge to create an experience of hopelessness and despair. Research has consistently shown that the large majority of people who die by suicide have a mental health condition at the time of their death. It may or may not have been recognized by the person or their loved ones. It may not have been diagnosed or adequately treated. That said, research has also made clear that mental health conditions cannot be the whole story. The vast majority of people who have these health conditions do not die by suicide. In addition to mental health conditions, there are many other factors that increase risk as well. We've learned that the brains of people who die by suicide differ from those who die from other causes in terms of structure and function, specifically in the areas related to stress response and impulse control. We've also learned that most people who are suicidal are ambivalent about taking their life. Part of them wants to live, part of them wants to die. This research has informed key strategies in suicide prevention that involve engaging the part of the person that wants to stay alive and helping to create distance from the part of them that wants to die. One way we do that is to help the person connect with reasons for living, while at the same time decreasing the visibility and presence of things around them that may facilitate their desire to die. One of the many important things we have learned from research is about the perspective of a suicidal person, that a crisis point has been reached. For a suicidal person, the pain seems unbearable, whether it's emotional pain, physical pain, or sometimes both. For a moment, I'd like you to think back to the most physically painful experience of your life. And at that moment, would you have been able to give someone clear and accurate directions to your house? Probably not. The pain makes ordinary thinking nearly impossible. For a suicidal person, thinking becomes constricted at that moment of crisis, a state of intense tunnel vision where other options seem unavailable. Someone who considers suicide cannot foresee a time when that unbearable pain will end. Understanding the perspective of the suicidal person has also helped us to learn that suicidal feelings are often temporary. They can come on intensely and can sometimes pass in minutes or hours. Keeping people safe and helping them feel supported can get them through those critical moments. There is evidence that putting time and distance between an individual who is suicidal and the means to take their life can be a life-saving action. This is why it is so important that we take steps when we know someone is struggling to help keep them safe. Research has also helped determine the key factors that increase the risk for suicide. Risk factors are defined as characteristics or conditions that increase the chance a person may take their life. Risk factors are important to know to understand the big picture of someone who is considering suicide. Just like someone who is at risk for heart disease because of high blood pressure or a history of heart disease in the family, some people are at a higher risk for suicide than others. The main risk factors shown here can be grouped into three categories: health factors, historical factors, and environmental factors. These risk factors can converge at different times in life and increase a person's risk for suicidal behavior at particular points in time. The first type of risk factors include health factors, such as biological and psychological medical conditions, the most significant of which are mental health conditions. As we said before, most people who die by suicide have an active mental health problem at the time of their death. Depression is the most common mental health condition and the one that is most associated with suicide. Bipolar disorder is also shown to be high risk, although the disorder is less common than depression. Because these conditions put a person at greater risk for suicide, detecting the presence of a mental health condition is critically important. The best way to be sure when you feel concerned or detect a possible change in you or your loved one's mental health is for the person at risk to seek professional evaluation and effective treatment. Many people may not realize that their distress has actually become a health problem. Providing information about how to access mental health care or a crisis number if their distress is high can be a solid step in helping connect them to the help that they need. And we'll talk more about this later in the discussion when we directly address prevention. Mental health conditions are not the only health factors that are associated with suicide risk. Serious or chronic health conditions can increase risk, especially when the person also has mental health issues. Chronic pain and serious head injuries have also been found to increase suicide risk. The second type of risk factors include historical factors, such as a family history of suicide, a family history of mental health conditions, past trauma, such as sexual abuse or PTSD. Research has also found that a history of childhood abuse can contribute to suicide risk. And while most people who attempt suicide do not go on to die by suicide, previous suicide attempts are also considered historical risk factors for suicide and also put a person at an increased risk. The third type of risk factors are the environmental factors, and that involve the circumstances of a person's life. Often there are aspects of a person's environment that can contribute to their overall level of risk. Let's But a few of the most common. Having access to a way of killing oneself is referred to as access to lethal means. This includes having access to a variety of things, such as firearms, drugs, a bridge, a car, etc. Research has also shown that contagion, which is the exposure to another person's suicide, or an exposure to a too graphic or sensationalized account of suicide, especially among those with other risk factors, can increase a person's risk. Prolonged stress may include harassment, bullying, relationship problems, legal problems, unemployment. Stressful life events, which vary across the lifespan, include experiences like divorce, legal problems, or job loss. To better understand suicide risk, here is an example of a set of risk factors that could converge in a person who is suicidal. This example shows what is often the public perception of suicide. When someone dies by suicide, often the story only talks about the environmental factors. People see a life event like a breakup or a divorce, job loss, or bullying, and then they see the person die by suicide. So they might assume that that person killed themselves because of that one life stressful event. But that's never the full story. What others don't know is that the person who died may have had genetic risk for suicide. Maybe they were suffering from depression and anxiety disorders, and their work life had become increasingly stressful. Their underlying depression and anxiety could have made the situation at work even worse, or the work stress could have made their depression worse. Perhaps they'd also been drinking more than normal. The key is that the combination of risk factors could have contributed to the suicide death. Therefore, while a life event can play a precipitating role for suicidal behavior, without other underlying risk factors, life events alone aren't thought to cause suicide. Looking to the future, research will help us to find the best ways to fight suicide. Research is looking for biomarkers. For example, something testable in the blood that would help us to identify those at risk. A number of clinical treatments, like particular types of therapy, are effective for suicidal people, and more need to be developed and studied. The good news is that through research, we are learning more and more about what helps those who are in a suicidal crisis. Research can also help us to identify the most effective programs and interventions to reduce suicide rates and to reduce risk in those suffering from mental health conditions. Now that we have a better understanding of the scope of the problem of suicide and the key research findings, including the risk factors, this next section is going to focus on prevention. We will discuss the different types of protective factors with a focus on mental health, the importance of engaging in self-care, the need to provide support for suicide loss survivors and those with lived experience, and the critical prevention strategy of limiting access to lethal means. Just like there are risk factors that increase a person's risk for suicide, there are also protective factors that lower a person's risk. If you are proactive about your mental health and make an effort to get healthier, you protect yourself. More on this in a moment. Feeling connected to family and community support can protect against suicide. When someone is struggling with depression, anxiety, psychosis, or substance abuse, these protective factors that may normally be strong can erode and temporarily weaken. When that happens, having friends and family to remind us of our strengths can be a tremendous protective factor. Problem-solving skills also help. Life can get really tough, but being able to see a way through problems can be a protective factor. Cultural and religious beliefs that encourage connecting and help seeking and discourage suicidal behavior or create a strong sense of purpose can also be a protective factor. Because mental health care is so important for preventing suicide, we're going to focus on this topic for the next couple of minutes. Getting effective treatments for mental health conditions like depression or anxiety can prevent suicide. Critical to suicide prevention is getting people connected to mental health treatment. One of the biggest challenges in fighting suicide is getting people to address their mental health in the same way that they would for their physical health. In fact, of those suffering from a mental health condition, less than half seek treatment. One way to encourage individuals to seek help for their mental health conditions is to treat mental health like any other aspect of our health. There are certain times when a person becomes ill or has a chronic health condition to manage, and it's critical to seek a trained professional. We need to create a culture where everyone knows it's smart to take care of our mental health. Taking care of our mental health is just as important as taking care of our physical health. And seeing a mental health professional is a sign of strength, and many are taking that step. The person should request a thorough evaluation to figure out if there is a mental health condition affecting their life. There are many types of treatments available, like various kinds of psychotherapy and medications. Research has shown that for many people, the combination of both talk therapy and medications tend to be the most helpful. But the most important thing is to find the treatment that works best for the individual. The good news is that advocacy efforts are improving access to mental health services so that more people can get the treatment that they need. The law insurance plans to cover mental health services on par with physical health services. If we need mental health services, and 1 out of 4 of us will at some point, we should get treated and get our health back on track faster. And just like people can find strategies that optimize their physical health, people can do the same for their mental health. In addition to professional mental health care, proactive self-care strategies like good sleep, exercise, nutrition, and stress management can also play a role in protecting the mental health and promoting resilience. Prevention efforts also include support for those touched by suicide. The loss of one person to suicide profoundly impacts many. It's important that survivors have the support that they need, both to heal and to reduce their own risk. And since those with lived experience, those who have attempted suicide or who experience suicidal thinking are at an increased risk, we need to make sure that they have the support that they need to. For most people who are at a crisis point, the most important thing you can put between a suicidal person and their way of ending their life is time. Research shows that by temporarily reducing a suicidal person's access to lethal means, we give suicidal individuals time for that intense suicidal risk to diminish, and time for someone to intervene with mental health support and resources. For the majority of people who experience a suicidal crisis, if unable to access their chosen method, even temporarily, they are unlikely to engage in another action to end their life. In most cases, when a suicidal person doesn't have current access to the means that has been on their mind, they don't substitute with another method. Therefore, a clear way to prevent suicide is to limit access to lethal means. During a period of high risk, the safer their environment is, the better chance a suicidal person has of living through that crisis period. Suicide prevention research has looked at a number of ways to create safer environments. Installing an inexpensive carbon monoxide sensor that would automatically shut cars off if carbon monoxide levels reached unsafe levels would save lives. We've learned through research that installing barriers on bridges deters suicides, and in many cases, bridge barriers actually lower the suicide rate for the entire region. Restricting access to potentially lethal medications reduces suicides and can be as simple as requiring lethal drugs to be sold in blister packaging. Firearm safety is critical to reducing suicide rates. In the United States, firearms are used in roughly half of all suicides, making suicide prevention an important part of gun safety education. As noted already, and contrary to what you may think, when access to lethal means are limited, most people who are suicidal do not find the other means. Therefore, the suicide death does not occur in that moment, allowing more time for the person in crisis to get help and connected to someone. Now that we have reviewed the key suicide prevention efforts, we're going to talk now about what we can all do to help prevent suicide. It's important to have a caring, supportive conversation with someone you might be worried about, to allow them to share what they are experiencing. A conversation is a way to show you care and allows you to gain more information about their level of distress. Let's start by talking about the suicide warning signs. Watch for the warning signs in yourself and in others. While many of the suicide risk factors we discussed endure over a longer period of time, warning signs are observable signs that signal suicidal risk in the near future. It's important to pay attention to both the risk factors discussed earlier and the warning signs we're going to talk about now. If you see warning signs, reach out to individuals in your life you're concerned about and reach out to others if you're struggling. Seek mental health services if you are depressed or if your anxiety regularly interferes with your daily life, and encourage others to do the same. Suicide warning signs are typically displayed in three main ways that we can detect: talk, behavior, and mood. Many people who are suicidal talk about ending their lives. This may be directly or indirectly. A person might say it outright, or they might joke about it. Take it seriously. Some people say they have no reason to live. Others say things that let you know that they may feel trapped or that they are a burden to others. Or they might talk about feeling overwhelmed or being in unbearable pain. Behaviors that are atypical for an individual should also encourage you to speak to the person about what you are noticing. People thinking about suicide can display certain behaviors. There may be an increased use of alcohol or drugs. They may have trouble sleeping, either experiencing insomnia or sleeping too much. They may start acting more recklessly. They might withdraw from activities, especially from activities that they normally enjoy. They might isolate themselves from family and friends. They also might look for a way to kill themselves, such as searching for online methods or shopping for a firearm. They may also give away their possessions or show a related behavior, such as reckless spending. And people at risk for suicide can display, often quite subtly, any of the following moods: depression, apathy, rage, irritability, humiliation, anxiety, moods one would expect of someone who feels overwhelmed and desperate. We all have ups and downs in our mood, but when you notice a change that seems uncharacteristic or concerning, it is important to speak to the person about what you are noticing. For example, all of a sudden an unexplained happiness can indicate that an individual has decided on a plan and is relieved they will no longer be in pain. That's a lot of things to look for. So to sum it up, look for changes in behavior and always trust your instincts. Assume you are the only one who is going to reach out. In too many instances, people talked about their concern for someone amongst themselves, but hesitated to reach out to that person directly. So a good rule of thumb is if you are wondering if someone is depressed or overly anxious, that's a sign that you should reach out. If you have reached out before, reach out again. The first time the person may not have been receptive, but keep trying. Try talking to someone else, or you can even talk with a professional. And even if suicide turns out not to be a concern, they may still be in distress, and they may feel comforted and supported just by knowing that you care and that you are taking the time to listen. So how do you reach out to someone? Talk to them in private. Listen to their story. Express concern and caring. Ask directly about suicidal thoughts. Don't be afraid to ask the question, are you thinking of ending your life? Encourage them to seek mental health services. And if in crisis, take them to get help. There are some things to avoid when talking with someone who may be suffering from depression or anxiety. Avoid minimizing their feelings. Those of us who have never experienced major depression literally cannot imagine what it feels like. Avoid trying to convince them that life is worth living. If a person is nearing a crisis point, they are not thinking clearly. Philosophical debates about life being worth living tend not to be helpful. Avoid advice to fix it. If the person was having a heart attack, you wouldn't tell them at that moment to start exercising or to eat a better diet. If they are in crisis, what they need is to be heard and then led to help. Listen to their story and offer to help them find a health professional. Help them take active steps toward keeping their environment safe. And if you think someone might make an attempt on their life soon, stay with them. Do not leave them alone. However, if the situation does put your own safety at risk, leave the area immediately and call. Help them to remove lethal means or remove themselves from the potentially dangerous area. And always escort them to a mental health services area or an emergency. Help them to call the lifeline or call the lifeline yourself, and a trained counselor will help you tell you what you should do to help that person in distress. If they don't feel comfortable speaking to a counselor on the phone, they can also text TALK to the crisis Texas line at 741-741. Even if you never have to use these resources for yourself, it's important to know them because you may need them to help a friend. Both of these resources are open 24/7, 365 days a year. They never close. If it's an emergency, such as a suicide attempt in progress, always call 911. Together, we can create a culture that's smart about mental health, will save lives, and will vastly improve the lives of many more. It's a simple yet powerful idea, but talk does save lives. By caring and reaching out, we can all play a part in suicide prevention. And that concludes the presentation part of it. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen.
Sarah, this is Lynell again. Thank you for that. A lot of valuable information. So a couple of questions did come in while you're presenting. So our first question comes from Laura. It says, so many prescription medications have suicide or suicide ideation as a side effect. How do you see the onset of these thoughts?
Let me go into chat so I can read the question.
Okay.
I'm not seeing it.
I'll just say it, Sarah.
Okay.
It was for me. This is Laura, and it was just, all those prescription drugs. You know how whenever they do the commercials, and then possible side effects are, and it will list a laundry list, and then it will say suicidal thoughts or ideations or suicidal tendencies, and all I wonder is, oh my goodness, if someone lives alone and they're prescribed that medication, that seems like a real risky thing, a risky venture. And
it can be. That's why it's always good that you have somebody, that you can kind of trust to talk things about with. And also, it's very important that you keep in constant communication with your doctor. Most doctors are very good about if they're starting you on a prescription, or that you're on a prescription pretty regularly, that they do that they do check on you and they do make sure that you're doing okay. You know, I always tell people it's so important that you have to be the advocate for your own health. And you have to make sure that you're taking those steps and advocating for you. There's always going to be side effects to different medications and everything, but the best thing you can do is to take that medication that the doctor prescribes and to take it regularly. What is found is that sometimes people they'll start to feel better, especially on mental health medications. They'll start to feel better and then stop taking the medication. And that's when the side effects can occur. I hope that
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, no, that makes sense because they start feeling like, oh, we don't need this anymore. So then they
just,
cease with the
I don't need-
medication.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Linnell, I don't see the other questions. So
Okay. Sarah, so there's just a couple more. Is age a factor for suicide?
It is. So actually suicide risk is highest for white males ages 65 and over. A lot of that does have to do with retirement, job loss, chronic health pains, or chronic health issues. So it is actually highest for white males.
Okay. And also, are there any statistics on numbers related to children versus adults when it comes to suicide?
There are, I don't know them off the top of my head. I do know that overall in the United States, suicide is the 10th leading cause of death. In Florida, suicide is the 8th leading cause of death, and we are higher above the national average. And for ages 10 to 24, it is 10 to 18, it is the 2nd leading cause of death. So suicide rates are high as well in 10 to that, I would say the 10 to 24 age, they're also high.
Okay.
I'll put it in the chat. You can go to our website. There is a whole section of facts, figures, and statistics.
Outstanding. There we go.
In your chat, we're part of the North Florida chapter. And I will put that in there as well. So you can always visit the North Florida chapter's website and see a list of our upcoming events and programs that we do. And then I think Laura touched on it in the beginning, but we do have a big walk coming up in Jacksonville, and that's on Saturday, November 13th. That's going to be on the North Florida website.
Okay. A question from Diane. What are the guidelines for using the Baker Act when children express suicidal tendencies to a therapist or a counselor? And if you're comfortable answering this for you or your organization, what are your thoughts on how the Baker Act should be applied to minors?
So Florida does have the red flag law. So if there is a counselor or I think even a teacher in the state of Florida, if they do suspect something, they are required to report it. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to be Baker Acted, but it does mean you do need to report it to get the child help. And it's also up to the parents as well. So that's a tricky question because you do need the parent involvement, but I'm not sure of the specifics of a minor under 18 of the specifics of that. And I don't feel comfortable sharing my personal opinion on it. So.
Okay. A question for me. So I am a gay adult, and I know that a lot of our children in the LGBTQ community, in addition to going through the normal hormones and emotions of being a youth or an adolescent, our children tend to go through an added layer of stress and anxiety as they come into puberty and begin to, identify as LGBTQ. Are there anything that you would recommend or anything that we might be mindful of for those particular children?
Mm-hmm. So the LGBTQ community is also at a higher risk. And what's very important for them, and for it kind of goes hand in hand, but you need a supportive you need a support system, a really great support system around you where people accept you, judge you, they welcome you with open arms. They may not always, with the youth, they may not always receive that at home. But it's important for them to identify a trusted adults, really, that they have someone that they can talk to and that they feel supported. It's important for families to be supportive. They might not understand, but they know that they're there and going to support them no matter what. That's hugely important.
Sarah, this is Laura again. I had sent a couple of questions that had been passed to me by some, my kids, in fact, because of situations that they had seen. And I didn't know if you saw those in the chat. They were to you specifically.
Okay. Has COVID increased the occurrences of suicide? Is it increased for one specific group? Actually, so the CDC collects all the data on deaths of any kind in the United States, and there's generally a lag time. But from the preliminary data that we've seen from 2020, suicide rates actually decreased. And one of the reasons is because there was such a huge impact on people's mental health that more and more people were talking about it, and more people were getting help. So there was actually as far as we can tell, there was a decrease in 2020. That really goes to show how we do need to keep talking openly about mental health and making sure that we're getting help and getting help for others. Actively engaging in self-care strategies to better keep our minds healthy and our bodies healthy. And so we are, we're on that trend of decrease. However, COVID is not over and this pandemic isn't over. And so there might be long-lasting effects. We just don't know what they will be, since this is all new and we're not quite through with it yet.
That's so exciting, though, that the preliminary data is just kind of supporting the normalization of mental health care, then encourages people to seek that help that they need instead of, resorting to something more dire.
And I think a lot of there's been an uptick in getting help and talking about your mental health and reaching out. And so if we keep encouraging that behavior of reaching out when you need to, I think it's very encouraging as well. So there, I guess, is one positive that came out of COVID. Okay, I saw on the news about that there was an increased suicidal ideation of teenage girls who use Facebook or Instagram. What can be done to stop this? This is all new, and social media is still relatively new as far as research wise. So we don't have the latest, there hasn't been enough research done to figure out what the connection is and what's happening. But clearly, if you do have a child, it's important that you're limiting their social media use, because just being on social media or being on your phone all day or for multiple hours or hours at a time, that's not healthy or good for anyone. I mean, I know that when I go on Facebook, sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, look at all these positive things that are happening to everybody else. Why aren't they happening to me? And I'm a 42-year-old adult. So it's important that you do monitor your child's Facebook accounts or in all of their social media use, because just too much of one thing is not good, of anything. So more research is being done on it, but it's still a relatively new area that more needs to be delved into. So it is just really important just to monitor any child's online use and social media use. My major concern is teen mental health and suicide, but I think the schools tend to be simply academic. Schools must show a video once a year, but the kids I work with say there should be more kid to adult interaction. It's up to the schools of what they can do and what they don't do, but I do know that schools are required by law to have some mental health suicide training in there, and all that can be found on the Florida Department of Education's website. I'm not exactly sure specifically, it slipped my mind. But I do know schools do require it at some point. But again, that's up to the school district and the school board of what they decide for their factors. And that is all the questions that I have.
Do you have any others in the background, Linnell?
Nope, that's it. That was awesome.
I really appreciate it. And I hope that some of you will be able to join us in the Out of the Darkness walk out at Treaty Oak. It'll be a great day. I'm loving the fall weather.
I will put that in the chat as well.
Fabulous. Thank you, Sarah.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Sarah, so much. And Laura, thank you for setting this up and making this available to our members for today. We appreciate that. See if I can get a couple of announcements. There we go, it's on screen. So just real quick, we continue to have committee work being done by our education and healthcare committees, and those are currently chaired by our education director, Linda Mann. If you're interested in joining in the work of either of these committees, please go to Club Express under committees and join those so Linda can include you in her announcements for upcoming work. And they really are getting ready for legislative session under both of these committees. And I got a feeling there's going to be a lot of stuff going on in the Florida legislature in January. Redistricting committee, we have a meeting coming up on November 14th at 3 p.m. and that's going to be via Zoom. If you've been interested in that and haven't taken the time to join the redistricting committee, please take the time to do that. Also, our newsletter, you probably noticed over the last year or so that our newsletter has really begun to look more professional and provided more information. However, we do need some help with that. If you would be interested in learning how to edit or develop content for our newsletter, if you would reach out to Amy Mitchell, our communications director. That is her email address that is on the screen, communication@LWVJFC.org. Also, we have an election coming up. I'll cover some dates here in a moment, but two things we would like for you to do, especially if you are here in Duval County, is please go to the Duval County Elections website and check your voter status for a couple reasons. One, you want to make sure your voting status is, you want to know what it is and make sure that you're still active. But two, you want to check the status of your vote by mail. And there is a little bit of text there that will tell you when you have to request your next vote by mail ballot if you're going to continue to participate in that. Also, because of this election coming up, the 4 candidates who are participating in that election are actually listed on our vote411.org site. So you can take a moment to check that out, see how the candidates answered the questions that we submitted. But we're also looking for people, volunteers within the league, to help us gather data for future elections. We do have to download quite a bit of data from the different supervisors of elections of the 4 counties that we cover. But we also have to develop the questionnaires for the candidates for every single race that is going to be on our Vote 411. So if you're interested in that, please reach out to Deb. And this is our special unitary election that's coming up here in Duval County for at-large Group 3. This is the seat that became vacant after the death of City Councilman Tommy Hazuri. And just a reminder about a unitary election. So in a consolidated government like we have here in Jacksonville, a single primary election is held with a single ballot for all voters within each district, regardless of their political party affiliation. So the candidates appear on the ballot with the party labels and campaign as party candidates. And any candidate winning a majority of votes in the primary is elected. But if no candidate for a position wins a majority, the general election serves as a runoff between the top two winners, and that's regardless of party. So pay attention to that. That's going to be coming up Pearl Harbor Day, December 7th. And if no one gets the majority, there'll be another election on February 22nd. The deadline to register for this is November 8th for the upcoming first election. So please go to your election site and verify your voter status before November 8th. Vote by mail send dates started October 28th and will end November 4th. And early voting, a lot of us in Duval County are used to our early voting sites being open from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. But the Duval Supervisor of Elections has changed those to 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. at the early voting locations. So the first election will take place November 27th through the 5th for early voting. And then we may or may not need the one for the general election, which will be February 12th through the 20th. Okay. This is actually part of our local program. We committed to encouraging our members as well as the community to serve as poll workers. A lot of folks realize that during the pandemic, a lot of our poll workers who had been with us for 15 and 20 years have stepped away. Even in the time of vaccinations, we may not see all of them coming back. So we would encourage you, and we would encourage you to encourage others to go to the Duval County election site and sign up for poll worker training. Now, this is just for Duval County residents. The next training will be on the 18th of November at 5 p.m. It's roughly a little over 3 hours of training, and it's held at the Supervisor of Elections site on Emerson Road. So there are 13 seats available for that. And then again on the 20th of November at 9 a.m., there's still 18 seats available for that. And anybody who knows me knows that I believe in leadership by example. So I attended training already, and I will be working as a poll worker on December 7th for the election, and we'll continue to do so for elections after that. So if you're able and eligible to do that, please consider doing so. So the legislative session is coming up in January. It's a whirlwind. So just some hints of ways to stay in the know. One is to check out the Florida channel. You can see some of the committee work that's going on, and you'll be able to listen to people making public comment, as well as our legislators as they discuss bills and get ready to vote on those. Two, you can subscribe to the Capitol Report, which comes out from the state of Florida's website. You can subscribe to that, or you can track bills on the Senate or the House websites, and those are listed there. Some of our chairs will actually be tracking bills that are pertinent to the league topics. And then obviously our lobby corps in Tallahassee will be tracking bills that are relevant, and they'll be providing information via the voter. And this is where you can find us on our website, our Facebook page, as well as our Instagram. And if you have not yet logged into Club Express, changed your password, and looked at some of the events that are going on, or subscribed to committee or email distribution lists, we would encourage you to do so, that so you can stay in the know about what's happening locally, but also across the state. And having said that, I will say thank you so much for taking some time out of the middle of your day. Like I said, it's still gorgeous outside where I'm at downtown, and we appreciate you giving up a portion of your day to join us here. And again, thank you to our guest speaker today, Sarah, and thank you, Laura, for setting this up. So I look forward to seeing some of you at maybe some local meetings here soon.